Today, we explore a question that has shaped history and continues to influence global affairs. Why are North and South Korea divided? To understand this division, we must look back at a time when Korea was a unified nation, one people with a shared language, culture, and heritage. For centuries, Korea remained a single kingdom, but its fate changed in the early 20th century. In 1910, Korea was annexed by Japan and remained under Japanese control until the end of World War II in 1945. When Japan surrendered, the Allied forces had to decide Korea's future. However, instead of independence, Korea was split into two zones, one controlled by the Soviet Union in the north and the other by the United States in the south. The dividing line was drawn at the 38th parallel. As tensions between the Soviet Union and the U.S. grew into the Cold War, Korea became a battleground of ideologies. The North, influenced by communism, established a government backed by the Soviets. Meanwhile, the South formed a separate government with Western support. This ideological divide soon turned into a violent conflict. In 1950, North Korea launched an invasion of South Korea, sparking the Korean War. This brutal conflict drew in international forces, with the U.S. and United Nations backing South Korea and China assisting the North. After 3 years of devastating war, an armistice was signed in 1953, but a formal peace treaty was never reached. To this day, North and South Korea remain technically at war. The division is most visible at the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, a heavily guarded border stretching across the peninsula. Beyond this physical barrier, the two Koreas have taken dramatically different paths. South Korea has flourished as a democratic nation with a booming economy, technological advancements, and global influence. North Korea, on the other hand, remains an isolated, authoritarian state with strict government control over its people. Over the years, there have been multiple attempts at reunification, with moments of diplomatic progress and hope. However, military tensions, economic sanctions, and ideological differences continue to hinder reconciliation. Today, North and South Korea remain divided not just by a border, but by politics, governance, and deeply rooted historical scars. Yet, despite their separation, the people of both Koreas share a common history and culture. The dream of reunification still lingers in the hearts of many, though the path forward remains uncertain. Understanding this division is not just about history. It is about the ongoing struggle between war and peace, control and freedom, separation and unity. The Korean Peninsula was historically a unified nation for over 1,000 years. It was ruled by various dynasties, including the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties, which shaped its culture, language, and traditions. Throughout its history, Korea maintained its sovereignty despite facing invasions from neighboring countries such as China and Japan. However, its geographical position made it a focal point for competing powers, which ultimately played a role in its division in the 20th century. In 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea, beginning a harsh colonial rule that lasted for 35 years. During this period, the Korean people faced cultural suppression, economic exploitation, and forced labor. The Japanese government attempted to erase Korean identity by banning the Korean language in schools, forcing Koreans to adopt Japanese names, and exploiting the country's natural resources. Many Koreans resisted through underground movements and uprisings, but their efforts were brutally suppressed. When World War II broke out, many Koreans were forced into military service, labor camps, and even sexual slavery as comfort women. The occupation ended with Japan's defeat in 1945, but the legacy of this period left deep scars on Korean society. As World War II came to an end, the question of Korea's future became a significant issue among the Allied powers. The U.S. and the Soviet Union, the two dominant victors, agreed to divide Korea along the 38th parallel as a temporary measure. The northern half was occupied by Soviet forces, while the southern half was under American control. The intention was to eventually reunify Korea under a single government, but ideological differences between the two superpowers prevented this from happening. Instead, the The division became permanent as both the North and the South established separate governments, the 38th parallel, an arbitrary line drawn with little regard for cultural or geographical factors, became the dividing boundary between North and South Korea. In the North, a communist regime was established under the leadership of Kim Il-sung with the backing of the Soviet Union. In the South, a democratic government was set up under Syngman Rhee, with support from the United States. Both sides claimed to be the legitimate government of all Korea, leading to mounting tensions that eventually erupted into war. The Cold War intensified global tensions between the US and the Soviet Union, and Korea became a battleground for these opposing ideologies. North Korea adopted a communist system modeled after the Soviet Union and China, emphasizing state control, collectivization, and a centrally planned economy. Meanwhile, South Korea embraced democracy and capitalism, aligning itself with the West. This ideological conflict deepened the division, as both governments sought to unify Korea under their own system, leading to hostility that persists to this day. On June 25, 1950, North Korea launched a surprise invasion of South Korea, aiming to reunify the country under communist rule. The war quickly escalated into an international conflict, with the United States and United Nations forces intervening on behalf of South Korea, while China and the Soviet Union supported the North. The war was devastating, resulting in millions of casualties and widespread destruction. Cities and villages were reduced to rubble, and families were torn apart. After 3 years of intense fighting, a ceasefire was signed in 1953, but no peace treaty was ever established. The war left Korea in ruins and solidified the division between North and South. Following the armistice, the Demilitarized Zone (DMZ) was created as a buffer zone between the two Koreas. It is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world, spanning approximately 250 kilometers, 160 miles, and fortified with landmines, barbed wire, and armed soldiers. Despite its name, the DMZ remains a site of occasional military confrontations, with tensions flaring up periodically. The presence of U.S. military forces in South Korea and North Korea's continued development of nuclear weapons have further heightened hostilities. The border symbolizes not only a physical divide, but also the lasting effects of war and ideological conflict. Over the decades, North and South Korea have developed into starkly contrasting nations. South Korea experienced rapid economic growth, becoming one of the world's leading economies with industries in technology, entertainment, and manufacturing. It boasts a high standard of living, a democratic political system, and global influence. Meanwhile, North Korea remains an isolated authoritarian state, governed by a strict dictatorship that controls nearly all aspects of life. The North's economy has struggled due to international sanctions, mismanagement, and prioritization of military spending over public welfare. The contrast between the two nations highlights the long-term impact of their division. Despite decades of separation, there have been multiple attempts at reconciliation and reunification. In 2000 and 2007, North and South Korean leaders held historic summits to promote peace and cooperation. Family reunions have occasionally been allowed for separated relatives, and cultural exchanges have taken place. However, progress has been inconsistent, with diplomatic efforts often derailed by military provocations, nuclear threats, and shifting international alliances. While some leaders have expressed hope for reunification, deep political and ideological divides make it a complex challenge. Today, North and South Korea remain technically at war, with ongoing military threats and sporadic clashes. North Korea's development of nuclear weapons has raised global concerns, leading to economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. South Korea, backed by allies like the U.S., continues to strengthen its defenses while advocating for peaceful solutions. Though moments of dialogue and temporary agreements have occurred, lasting peace remains elusive. The division of Korea continues to affect not only the Korean people but also international relations. As the peninsula remains a geopolitical flashpoint, the division of Korea is not just a political and military issue, it is a deeply human one. Families remain separated, cultures have evolved in different directions, and decades of mistrust have created an enormous barrier to reconciliation. Yet, despite this painful history, the dream of reunification is not lost. While North and South Korea have taken vastly different paths, they still share a common heritage, language, and identity. The world has witnessed moments of hope, from diplomatic meetings to cultural exchanges, proving that peace is possible. The road to reunification may be long and uncertain, but it is a journey worth taking. The Korean Peninsula stands as a symbol of both the costs of division and the potential for unity. As we reflect on its past and present, we must continue to support dialogue, understanding, and peaceful cooperation. Perhaps one day, the barriers, both physical and ideological, will come down, and Korea will once again stand as one.